everyone for joining, and we will see all the others as they come, no worries. So we start as we usually do by acknowledging the country. So Yarra Valley Water proudly acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of land, water, and skies in which we live and work. We pay our deepest respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize the continuing connection First Peoples have with the country and their care for it for thousands of generations. So now I would love to introduce you to Heather. You probably have checked the bio we attached to our invitation. And I, on top of that, would like to highlight some of her incredible accomplishments over the years, or at least a few more that weren't covered in that bio there. Heather is a respected voice in the international arena of business, corporate innovation, consulting, and coaching. She has worked with many iconic brands across the globe, and I will not list off them. It's way too many. Heather, you can mention that if you want later. But one of her greatest gifts is her ability to grow people. From my own experience, Heather has this beautiful ability to understand what people need at a deeper level. She can sense what sits in their heart, what may be their limiting beliefs, and what may be preventing them from stepping into their fullest potential. She has had an immense impact on my own leadership style and how I show up at work every day. So a mom, like many of us, well, of many, you'll talk later maybe. More recently, she has been studying neuroscience in a greater depth, and now is rethinking our educational system through a new project that she has underway. Just as simple as that, rethinking the whole education, how it should be. I met Heather a few years ago in an event where she was speaking. After a session, a friend and I went to her and approached her, saying that we wanted her to be our mentor. The story is much longer than that, but since I've completed Heather's Power of You program and event, and now I attend to monthly leadership mentoring circles that she hosts with other leaders. So it's a real pleasure and joy and honor to have Heather here with us today and being able to introduce you her. So with you, Heather, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Patricia, for the very warm welcome and the lovely introduction. I always listen to the bio and kind of cringe a little bit because bios are supposed to make you sound amazing, but I always think, oh no, I'm just Heather. I don't know about all of that. I think probably for you beautiful women, the important thing to know is, yes, all of those things that Patricia said are true. But most importantly, I'm not sharing with you today from the perspective of someone who knows everything about how to find our voice or how to create our own certainty around our leadership and how we influence others. But I know what it's like to be in the trenches. I guess that's the key thing that I would want you to know about me. In addition to running a couple of businesses myself, I basically help 5 other businesses run their businesses. But most importantly, I have 8 children. And so, you know, I kind of know what the reality of life is like for women. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today because I really like the topic, and I don't know who chose it, but I'm assuming, Patricia, you probably had a fair bit to do with it. Really thinking about how do we maximize our voice and our influence. And so I've got some good, cool things to share with you today, but I've also got some cool questions to ask you. And even if you've got half an ear listening to this and you're busy doing other things, that's okay too. But if you have a moment to be able to just tap in when we've got those questions on the table, that would be really great. To begin with, I thought it would be really helpful to kind of set the scene a little bit in terms of the context within which not only you're working, but people in the STEM field are operating. it is not going to be of any great surprise to any of you to say that it is a man's world. Whilst I love the men in my life, I think they get a fairly smooth ride compared to we women. But one of the things I love is that things are beginning to shift and change a little bit in this regard. And I really like that, because I think it's important for us all to recognize and work to dissolve constraints, not just for ourselves, but for other young women who follow in our footpaths, and certainly for our children. But also to, in a sense, find ways to make sure that even in a context where there's a lot of dominant male thinking, that we're always planting the seeds of different perspectives. The second thing is that I think that society has fundamentally different expectations of women to what it does of men. Fundamentally, our expectations of men is that they will provide. End of story. Even though women are now providing often as much, if not more, than men. And we're supposed to raise children and keep home and cook meals and engage with the community and look after the extended family and take care of elderly parents and be at home when the kids have sick days and all of those other things. I won't embarrass anyone on the call by asking you to raise your hand if your partner, husband, or the man in your world ever sends Christmas cards or birthday cards, unless you buy them for him, put them in front of him and tell him it's time to send a birthday card. So we know for a fact that women are the ones who, I like to say that they are the glue that bind. They are the glue that keep families together, and they are the glue that often bond and bind communities as well. So from my perspective, it's really great to know that you beautiful women have this opportunity within your workplace to connect as women and to talk about the sorts of things that are unique to women's experience, not just of Yarra Valley Water, but of life. I think those opportunities to connect as women is really important. To begin with, I want to talk about a few things that, if you like, lay the foundation for an exploration of something like how we find our voice and how we use our influence. First and foremost, I want to talk about values. Values are, in a sense, the filters through which we make sense of ourselves and the world around us. And they're a crucial foundation piece to how we build our lives. One of the things that I find a little bit challenging is that when we talk about values, everyone wants to talk about values. Everyone knows that values are really important, but we're not ever really taught exactly what they are and how we know what our values are. So, and we don't have time to do that today, but I would encourage you to go and explore a book by a fellow by the name of Dr. John Demartini. Demartini and I have a not dissimilar perspective on values. As a man, I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with all of his morals, but as an educator, he is a great exponent of us understanding our values and the importance of how they shape our sense of who we are and the world in which we live. One book that I would commend to you is one called The Values Factor. The Values Factor by Dr. John Demartini, with a D and the cocktail. And I think one of the things that John talks about that's really important is the importance of aligning our values when it comes to making decisions. And it's really important that we don't undervalue the importance of that, because the research tells us that understanding and making decisions in alignment with our values allows things to happen with ease and elegance and grace in our life. Think of it as the universe conspiring to help you get what you want, in a sense. And yet the difficulty is, and again, the research speaks to this, is that if I were to ask any one of you, what do you value? In most cases, you'd give one of three answers. Either you'd answer based on what your parents taught you, so what you've grown up around, or you'd answer according to what you think I want to hear, particularly if you perceive that I am in some position of authority in relation to you. And the third thing is you will answer based on what is the dominant, what we call social discourse. So, you know, if you're a married woman, you're supposed to say family. Or if you're a married woman with children, I should say, you're supposed to say family. And yet none of those things really, in the end, dictate what our values are. Certainly family has an influence. Certainly the society and the culture in which we grow has an influence. But it's really important for us to have the opportunity to check in with ourselves and truly understand at a deep level, what are our values and how do those values influence how we experience life. The reason I like Demartini's work is because many years ago I developed a process. I was sort of a bit of a weird kid, and I had this sort of insatiable appetite to understand the human condition and what makes us do the things that we do. And to an extent, I think that part of what started my exploration of this area was because I looked at what is it that allows certain people to make decisions to walk a particular path when everyone else thinks it's not really the done thing. And in some ways, I mean, I can't see a lot of your faces, but you all look like you're quite young. Well, certainly everyone's young compared to me, but you look like you're quite young. And I do think that one of the great things is that as we mature as a culture and as a society, we are much more open to the fact that gender is not a definer of people's capacity to do things well. Oh, you'll have filters on so you look younger. Great. Clearly I don't. But I think that whilst it might be getting a little bit easier for us as women to enter into certain areas of work or certain forms of study and those sorts of things, I think there's still a little bit of a hangover from the past. And even the fact that we're here today talking about how to find our voice and maximize our influence tells us that there are still things stacked against us. But I would start with the importance of values, and I would encourage those of you who have never had the opportunity to go through a values exploration process to find a way to make that happen. This is not a pitch for extra work, but we do certainly do that sort of thing as part of the work we do here at the Elevation Company. And I favour processes that allow you to really dive in and investigate your life, as opposed to, you know, the process where you spread the cards and sort of say, okay, choose a word that today stands out for you. Any exploration of values is a good thing. Let me go on record as saying that any exploration of values is a good thing. The difficulty with the card system is that, you know, if you just lost a parent or if you ran over the neighbour's cat this morning, then the way you would answer is slightly different. And so I am an exponent of processes that allow you to really look at and investigate your life so you can better understand what is your life telling you about what matters to you. The lovely thing is that we know from the research that once you do understand your highest values, 82% of all of the good stuff, your time, your energy, your focus, your money, your resources, etc., goes into your top 5 values. Now that's important because if you have values that are outside the top 5, fundamentally they're not getting a lot of oxygen. But it's also important because it points to the importance of your top 5 values. And in fact, of that 82%, 86%, so a fairly high overall percentage, goes into your top 3. And what the research also tells us is that if you make decisions in alignment with those highest 3 values, you will experience a far greater level of ease and elegance and grace in the way that things happen for you. Probably most of you would know someone you would describe as your lucky friend. that person who, no matter what they're doing, they just have all the luck. They get the great jobs, they get the promotions, they get the hot guy or girl, whatever. They win the chook raffle at the pub on a Friday night. Like, they're just annoyingly lucky. We won't ask you to put your hands up, but some of you may be that friend. I am certainly one of those friends. And I don't think it is that those people are born lucky. Certainly there are situations and circumstances that advantage a young person in their growth and development, for sure. But these are people who understand the importance of their values, and they construct their lives in a way that are in alignment with those values. And when you do, things do tend to unfold in quite a different way. So I would certainly make one of today's strategies an encouragement for you to really do some kind of deep dive into your own values and understand how those can show up in life. It does actually make making decisions a hell of a lot easier. And I'll give you an example. I'm not really a best friend sort of person, but I did have a very, very, very close buddy in New Zealand many years ago. And unfortunately, she was dying of cancer. And so for the last sort of 5 or 6 months of her life, I spent as much time as I possibly could over in New Zealand with her, practically sort of lived over there, and then came back to Australia when I needed to do things. And she was deteriorating reasonably rapidly at this point. And I was due to come back to Sydney for a speaking gig. And she said to me, "So what are you doing about Sydney? Are you going?" And I said, I just don't know how to make that decision. I want to stay here with you and, be sure that I'm around. So I haven't decided yet. And I was feeling the weight of it because I basically had about 24 hours before I needed to cancel my tickets if I was going to do that or change them or whatever. And I went out for a run. And when I came back, I said to my girlfriend's name was Marg, and I said to Marg, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And she and I were always up for cups of tea. Everything in life is better with a cup of tea, in our opinion. So I made her a cup of tea, and she said, "So what time are you leaving tomorrow?" And I was like, "Hang on a minute, we haven't talked about it." And she said, "Oh, come on, I know your values. Number one, growth. You're not going to grow by staying here. I'm not going to grow by having you stay here. Number two, connection. We've done all the connecting we need to do. There's no subject we haven't covered. If you go and speak at that event, you could not only meet some great people, you could influence their growth. You could connect with a whole lot of people, and you could help them to better connect with themselves." And at the time, my third value was relationship. And she said, "I don't think our relationship is going to be improved by you staying, but you could go there and create a whole lot of new relationships, and you could help people improve the quality of the relationships they already have." And it's funny because when she said that, it became remarkably simple to make the decision. It was not easy, and I was very fearful as I left that she may die while I was gone. She did, of course, say to me, "Just to annoy you, I'll stay alive until you come back." And I went, and the event was amazing, and I did meet some awesome people and make some great connections and contribute to people's growth and so on. And I did go back 4 days later, and she was still alive, and we had a good number of weeks together after that. But whilst that's an extreme example, it gives you an indication of the fact that when you know that there's an opportunity for you to decide something about, so you've got an opportunity to move house, or you've got an opportunity to take a new job, or you've got the opportunity to do a secondment or something like that. If you stop and think about your 3 highest values and line that decision up with those, things will be a hell of a lot simpler for you. If you can't decide based on 3, then it extended out until you hit your 5. And it becomes a reference point for life. Now, obviously, that was not an easy decision, but it was actually simple. if you can understand the distinction between the two. When I actually really looked at what was truly important for me, it was a simple decision, even though it was terribly hard as well. So in every aspect of our life, whether it's our career or our family or our community involvement or whatever, knowing those values is quite crucial. The next thing that I want to talk about is this notion of you can't see your label from inside your bottle. If I asked you all right now, make me a list of 10 things that you think you're good at, most of us would get 3 or 4 without having to think too much. We might get 1 or 2 more, and then we'd be like, ooh. It always makes me think about, I spent quite a bit of time when I was living and working in New Zealand in the recruitment sector. And I couldn't get over how there'd be a job advertised and there'd be, say, a list of 10 key selection criteria. And it seemed to be that men would look at it and go, oh, I'm totally applying for that job because I've got 2 of those 10 key selection criteria nailed, like absolutely nailed. So I'd be a shoo-in. And women would look at the list and go, oh, I don't think I'll bother to apply because I've only got 8 of the key selection criteria items. So, you know, there's probably not a lot of point. And I was really curious about this. And I thought, what's going on here? And I think sometimes as women, we think, firstly, probably dangerously, we think that everyone thinks like us. And that's problematic because not everyone does. And that's part of what makes you unique and wonderful and fabulous for just being you. But if we get stuck inside our own heads too much, we start to feel as though everyone else operates in the same way that we operate. And it's just not the case. But we can get trapped into thinking that because we're all busy. Raise your hand if you don't have enough to do. You know, no one's going to put their hand up, right? So realistically, there's a hell of a lot of demand on all of us, I'm sure. But we are also the engineers of our own workload. Mostly women struggle to say no, whereas men seem to say no quite readily and quite easily. And I think we become our own worst enemies. It's almost as if in this day and age, you kind of get a badge for being busy. And I think it's actually quite dangerous. Because busyness doesn't necessarily mean that we are operating at our most effective. I'm a big fan of work smarter, not harder. Now, that's not always possible, but I would argue that if we pay attention to how we can do that, generally things will improve. And this notion of sort of, you can't see your label from inside your bottle. You know, we spend all of our time inside our bottle, floating around in generally self-imposed, pretty shitty wine. Because what I do know about women is we're incredibly good at judging ourselves. You know, we can achieve 10 wonderful things, but then we just do one thing wrong. And what is it that we remember? It's the one thing we didn't do well. It's the one thing where we fell short of our own expectations, and we sort of ignore the 10 where we've done an exceptionally good job. So I want to encourage you all to sort of get outside your bottle and have a bit of a look at your label. I was working with a big property development firm in Adelaide last week, a consulting client of ours. And I was working effectively with their senior executive team, 7 people in the room. And I said to them, tell me something that you really appreciate or respect or admire about your own leadership. 1, they struggled to come up with something. 2, when they did, it was, oh, you know, I think I'm kind of friendly. You know, I think most people would think I'm a good leader. I was like, what does that actually mean? So I then asked them this question. If I went and spoke to people in your team, what do you think they would say about your leadership? And whilst they all offered some kind of an answer, their answers indicated that they weren't often going out and asking. And this is one of the things that I think is really important for us, particularly as women, because we do get into judging ourselves and being harsh with ourselves quite a lot. When other people look at us and think, wow, it's a little bit like the introduction at the beginning. Patricia was probably just going from her experience of who I am and what I've done and the things I've achieved in my life. But there's, even for me, there's a part of me going, oh, don't tell them all of those things. And, you know, I read the bio that Patricia sent around to you all, and I was, oh yeah, she said, Heather won the most trusted business leader in Australia. Yeah, and I was like, but that was 10 years ago. Like, even in my own head, I was kind of ignoring my achievements or dismissing my achievements. And I think there's sort of something a little bit innate in all of us where we think that everyone else has kind of got it together and they really know who they are and what they're doing and all the rest of it. But we all have those doubts and we all have those uncertainties and we all pose those sorts of questions to ourselves. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to think about is, who can you ask that can give you really genuinely good feedback about the quality of your leadership or your contribution? It's not necessarily something I'd encourage you to take up, but once a month when I brought new team members into our business, we started an agenda item on every second whole team meeting, so once a month, that was called What Heather's Doing That Shits Me. And to begin with, there were very few offerings, but the impetus behind adding this to the agenda was to try and support the new team members to feel as though they could speak up. It is my business. It is, I'm the director of the company, but we operate as if it's everyone's business, and certainly everyone enjoys the spoils of the business, and everyone's able to innovate and create within the umbrella or under the umbrella of the business. And so I wanted people to feel as though they could provide genuine feedback. And at first, because they're very polite, they said things like, oh, no, Heather, you're not doing anything that shits me. And I said, well, you know, stretch yourself, come up with something. No, really. And I remember my PA at the time, she'd been with us for about 8 or 10 months. And I said, Trace, I'm sure there must be something that I've done that has annoyed you. And she actually, after being pushed 3 or 4 times, she said, well, I'll tell you what you do that annoys me. You seem to cope with everything. I make one little mistake and I have a meltdown, and, you know, I ring you crying and apologize for the fact that I've had, you don't ever seem to have any problems and you don't ever seem to be stressed about anything. And I got to thinking about this and I thought, wow, what invaluable feedback. Because at that time I was traveling at least twice every week. So making a trip to Sydney and a trip to Brisbane pretty much every week, as well as driving to Melbourne. I live about 2 hours north of Melbourne, or northeast of Melbourne. And I thought, oh, she doesn't see me pulling the case out of the cupboard on a Sunday afternoon and sitting on the end of the bed crying, because that's how much I was hating the travel, not the work. The work was amazing and the clients were spectacular, but the travel was just annoying. I was so over it. And so I just started talking gently. I didn't want to freak them out, but just started talking a little bit about, I was having a bit of a struggle on Sunday night. You know, I didn't want to go to Brisbane and I was sitting on the bed having a bit of a cry and feeling sorry for myself. And it had this amazing effect on the team because it gave them permission to be much more open about the things that they were struggling with as well. But it also really got me reflecting back on this notion of being inside your bottle or being outside and looking at your label. I'm pretty sure that if I asked all the people on this call, tell me 5 things that you admire and respect about Patricia's leadership, you could come up with them pretty quickly. But I'm also pretty sure if I asked Patricia, it would take her a little longer to put that list together. And I would describe her as someone who is pretty self-reflective, pretty intuitive, and pretty wise about the value of the things that she contributes to her work, her family, her community, and all of the other interests that she has. So it's really started me thinking about how do we get a balance between those two things? How do we be on the inside of ourselves and know what we know and feel certain about our own truth? But how do we also step outside that and look back at ourselves in a way where we can see what others see? And how do we do that in a way that is not riddled with judgment? So if there was a second strategy that I was going to recommend to you, then that is something that I would strongly encourage you to think about. How can you get feedback from people, and not just from the people in your team, but people that you work closely with, people that work a long way from you, people that you annoy? Like, I would actually go to the people I know don't like me and ask them, can you give me some feedback on how you think I'm operating at the moment? I don't have to agree with them. I don't have to take it on, but I can take it in at least enough to cause me to reflect in a different way. Because I think that one of the biggest challenges for us, again, as women, is that if there's anything that blocks our internal capacity to accept and appreciate and respect compliments, then we just don't take them on. So people can be running around saying wonderful things about us, but if we're not in a position to be able to take that into our own heart, then we just think they're a bit odd. And it actually speaks to how they don't really know who we are. Which then points me to the next area I'd like to talk about, and that is beliefs. Understanding what we believe about ourselves, what beliefs we hold and how they influence our journey is actually quite crucial. And beliefs come fundamentally in two flavors: what we call enabling beliefs and constraining beliefs. And sometimes a belief can actually be the same. So in one context, it can be enabling, in a different context, it can be constraining. But really looking into the beliefs that we hold about who we are as a person, who we are as a woman, who we are as a partner, who we are as a mother, if we happen to be, who we are as a daughter, who we are as a neighbor, all of those things. And really looking into it, because beliefs do color the lenses through which we see life. And they influence how we see ourselves on the daily. But if we're not investigating them, then we take certain things to be true, even when, if you put them under the microscope and investigated them a little bit, metaphorically speaking, you'd discover they're not true. And I want us to do a little bit of reflecting on this. I actually want to invite you all to just take a moment and think about, what beliefs do I hold? And are they enabling or are they constraining? What beliefs do I hold, and are they enabling or are they constraining? So for example, I grew up in a family where my mum is a very, very strong woman, as was her mum. And so I watched my mum manage 50 things at once and grew up believing that my job was to take on a whole lot of things and contribute a whole lot of things and say yes every time somebody asked something of me. So the belief was, I have to be strong. Now, in a certain context, that's a really good thing. That's a really good thing. In a different context, it might get in the way of me saying no when I'm exhausted and looking after myself. It might get in the way of me I don't know, it could get in the way of me taking on too much and not doing a job to the standard that I expect of myself. It could also stop me from asking for the help that I need. It could stop me from reaching out and getting the support and the assistance that I actually need to get something over the line. So I'm just going to give you a moment to take some valuable minutes to just think about, what beliefs do I hold about myself? I'm going to try very hard to play some music that doesn't annoy you, but I'm doing it through a speaker instead of through the system because the system sounds quite tinny. But I'm going to give you about a minute or so, or a couple, to just think about what beliefs do I hold about myself, not about the world, not the world is unsafe, about myself. I live in a world that's unsafe, for example. So just a little bit of time to reflect on that question. What do I believe about myself? Enabling or constraining?
You disappear when it gets real. Call it space, call it time.
I believe I'm a good person.
Say you need to breathe alone, but you still breathe in mine.
I believe I'm caring.
You act like love's a burning house, like staying means you love.
I believe I'm clever.
But every time
I believe I'm an innovator or a trailblazer.
So go ahead, your friend helps you sleep. I don't need to chase.
And then flip to the ones that are not so helpful. I believe I'm too loud. I believe my voice doesn't matter.
As far as you need to run, I won't stop you. You'll come back softer.
I believe that I'm invisible.
There's no world where I'm not you.
I believe I'll never be good enough.
You'll come back to the choice you made. You think freedom somewhere far past every open road. But what if freedom's in my arms and you're just scared to know? You say I'm not the settling type, you don't believe in forever. But every time you're close to me, you look like you surrender. Run, as far as you need to run. I won't stop you. You'll come back softer. You'll come back.
30 seconds more.
There's no world where I'm not you. I'm not afraid. You'll come back to the choice you made.
Okay. If you're brave enough, I'd love to hear some of them. What are the things that you believe about yourself that enable you or support you in life? And what are the things that you believe about yourself that don't support you? If you're brave enough to share, I guarantee other people will be going, oh, wow, you too. I have 8 children, ladies. I'm prepared to outweight you.
I'm happy to go.
Good on you,
If you
Kate.
like. So one of the things is that I would say is I like making people or more enabling. It's like like making people feel welcome or included.
Yeah. Great.
Particularly if they're different or if they don't know people or whatever. Like that's definitely something I believe about myself, that I will
Yep.
notice that and try and act on that. And then on the other side, and this is one probably increasingly, and probably my life stage too, like aging parents, kids, one becoming a teenager, working full time, is I'm increasingly have this little self-thought that's just like, oh, I'm hopeless. I can't keep up with everything. So, and just that little word hopeless sneaks in to that
Yep.
self. Yep. Oh, I just can't keep up. Yeah.
Yeah. Good on you, Kate. And thanks for being brave enough not only to go first, but to share that, because I don't think there's anyone on this call that wouldn't be thinking, even if they don't want to admit it, oh, yeah, you too. Because we all have those moments, right? We all have those moments. And I don't know, no one ever said to me, Kate, there'll be this little window of about 3 or 4 years where the kids all leave home and you've got your life to yourself before your aging parents need you. But for those of you who are under the age of 40, heads up, girls, you've got this little window somewhere in there. And I reckon it's about 3 or 4 or 5 years, certainly no more. I feel like, oh God, I've got this enormous freedom. All the kids have left home. They're all well set up. The grandchildren are beautiful. I can go and hang out and just leave when I need to. It's fabulous. And then suddenly my dad dies and my mum needs a whole lot of extra care. It's a really interesting sort of thing, the way that we reflect on how we show up and what we believe about ourselves at certain stages of life. And that's what you're talking about, Kate. You're talking about a life transition, really. One of those periods in time as we grow and develop where the pieces on the chessboard seem to move around us somewhat unexpectedly. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you very much for sharing. Who else would like to share?
I've got one I'm happy to share.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mine is sort of enabling and can hold me back as well. It's a little bit
great.
of both. I feel like I work through problems, challenges, and issues much better when I'm collaborating with others and bouncing ideas off.
Right.
So on the one hand, it's a more collaborative approach. It gets more input. So it's sort of a positive, but I think it does hold me back on making decisions in isolation as well.
Yeah. Good on you, Bronwyn. May I ask you a question about it?
Sure.
In the times where it feels like it's constraining for you, does it come from a place of sort of doubting yourself?
I think so. Doubting my knowledge and capability at times.
Yeah. Good on you. Yeah, which I think, again, I'm not asking people to raise their hands, but I think we can all relate to that. And in fact, Bronwyn, just this morning, so I actually took the 3 days of the long weekend off, with the exception of a little bit of time yesterday afternoon and then some meetings and a catch up with the team in Singapore last night. But I wrote the things that I was going to talk with you about today about Thursday of last week. And because I'd sort of ignored the world for the weekend, came back in this morning and thought, oh, gee, I don't know whether is this. And so I did exactly what you just described. I rang a member of the team and said, hey, can I just talk you through what I'm intending to discuss with these women? It actually happened to me, a male colleague. And he's like, yeah, no, it's great. Why are you asking? I went, oh, I'm not sure. I was just looking for some external validation. Thanks very much. So I think it's a really, and good on you for recognizing, Bronwyn, that in one context, it can actually be really helpful, because, you know, there's nothing more wonderful, and particularly in a work environment where you work with a really awesome group of people and the outcome is far greater than the sum of the parts. You know, that's what, I mean, your organization is actually known for its innovation. That could be just because I hang out with Patricia, I'm not sure. But it's known for its innovation. And so it encourages, from what I understand, that kind of dialogue and tete-a-tete that means that you come out with a better outcome. But it's an interesting thing, because in what Bronwyn's shared, what I want to invite you to think about is, what's the come from? Where's the place within you that comes from? Because this morning it came from self-doubt for me. When I looked at the sheet, I was like, have I really nailed that? And what made me reach out to this fellow's name is Dennis and say, can I just run this past you? was a doubting of myself, because I've had 3 days of not thinking about work at all. And normally I'm very much in the zone. And yet I'm there, they call me the last chance speaker. So when somebody gets sick at the last minute, or, you know, someone's plane doesn't arrive on time or whatever, they just go and grab Heather Yellen. She could speak, well, there's a sort of a saying that she could speak underwater with a mouthful of marbles for an hour. And I probably can, even though I'm quite introverted. But I think that it's good for us to really reflect on, where does this come from in ourselves? Is it coming from me wanting that dynamic of achieving something that's in a more elevated space because everyone's had input? Or is it coming from me doubting myself? Brilliant, Bronwyn. Thank you so much for sharing. Who else would like to? Let's take one more share. Erica's got that "it won't be me" grin.
I'll go.
Good on you, Erica.
Sorry, Erica, you've just been dobbed in.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I'm fine. But you go, Sunita.
Go ahead. Did you put?
Yeah.
Did you want to?
No, it's all right. You can go. I do. It's fine. I was on mute, but that's all good. Go.
Oh no, I don't want to steal your voice, so you go.
No,
ahead,
no,
please.
All good.
Now, see, if this was a group of men, one of these people would just say, "Thanks, I'll go."
Yeah.
I know we're being really polite, aren't we?
Yeah.
But it's also who we are, and to be honest, I don't think we want to lose that.
Yeah.
But we'll come to that later. Erica, go.
All right. So I had like caring and dependability are sort of my beliefs and what I feel like I'm always, yeah. And that can also be like as a downfall as well, because if you're too dependable, then people just expect that, you know, you'll always just be there regardless. Yeah. So those, yeah.
Good on you, Erica, and thank you for being dobbed in. I'm inclined to say, and I know it's almost seems insulting, and I don't mean it. I mean it with the greatest of respect. But I really love you all to write down, "I cannot give from an empty tank." Because this is one of the things where most of us are good at caring. You know, I've raised 8 children, none of whom I birthed because I couldn't have children. 2 of them are foster children. But the caring got to the point where sometimes I'd given beyond my understanding of who the hell, like I lost me. You know, I lost me in the process. So I would encourage you all to stop and think about, what am I doing to fill my own tank? How am I caring for me? Because I know it's sort of, you know, there's a bit of no shit Sherlock about it. But if we're not filling our own tank, then how can we genuinely give to others? And the interesting thing is, you know, Patricia, when she introduced me, said, well, you know, Heather does this and she does this and she does this. And at the moment she's creating an alternative to the education system. I actually am. I'm one of those people that just loves to have something to focus on and put my energy into. I'm very good at relaxing. Spent most of Saturday just sitting reading a book. Very good at relaxing. But there's, you know, there might be 50 taps at the bottom of my tank. And at times it feels like they're all turned on. So there's just water going out, water going out. As long as what's filling the tank at the top is okay, it doesn't matter how many taps I've got at the bottom and how open they are. But I think as women, we're perhaps not as adept at that. Not because anyone asks us to keep giving, but because we won't say no. So yeah, what Erica has raised is a really powerful reflection. Thank you, Erica. Sumiti.
Mine's actually really similar to Erica's, but slightly different. So I had listed down caring being something that was a positive part of who I am as a person and also a leader. But I also think that can work detrimentally against me because I work in a heavily male-dominated environment, and that care can sometimes be misconstrued as a not being strong, or perhaps an inability. I care too much about something.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, and I found myself hearing, I'll say something and then I'll hear a male say exactly what I've just said, and then everyone will, oh, so-and-so said it, and it's like, okay, I actually said it first.
Yeah. Yes.
But perhaps the way I said it, or the way I articulated it wasn't with the same gravitas.
Yes. Yeah. I really love what you're sharing, Suniti, because I think that everything is energy, right? This is actually something we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, but everything is energy. And there is a quality that I've noticed. Like, if I think about the men that really earn my respect, the women that really earn my respect, and what's common, it is this sense of certainty. And I'm very fortunate that I have a fairly hefty dose of that. Because as soon as Dennis put the challenge this morning about, like, okay, so what's going on? Why are you asking? And I said, oh, I'm just having a little bit of a wobble with whether or not the content is right, or the pitch of the content. And he said, that's not like you. You're usually really certain. And I was like, ooh, yeah, he's right. And certainty, and I just want to make a distinction that might be helpful. There's confidence, right? And all of us would like a little bit more confidence. Confidence is often contextual. So I really feel confident with my team, or I feel really confident when I work on this piece of work, or I feel really confident in my community, or I feel confident about my place in the family. That's great. And we all want to foster confidence. But I like this and I like this notion of certainty. And the reason I like the notion of certainty is because certainty for me is the feeling I have about the fact that it won't matter what the situation is, what goes down, I am certain of my ability to find a way to navigate through it. And so certainty is this sort of abiding energy that just goes with you, no matter what you're doing, or where you're traveling, or what you're looking at, or what you're dealing with. Certainty is what helps me walk into any situation, even one I'm very unfamiliar with, and just find a way to navigate it. So then I started there at certainty and worked backwards and kind of went, well, okay, what's created that sense of certainty? And I think just picking up on what Suniti said, and I'm sure she's not the only one that's had an experience of saying something in a meeting or in a certain context that appears to not be heard, and then someone else will say it, and everyone will go, oh, yes, Tom, that's a really great idea. I love that. And you're like, hang on, what am I, chopped liver? Because I said it just a moment ago. Most of us would have had an experience of that in some way, shape, or form. And if I really investigate the times that I watch people say something when it really lands, and I watch people say something and it doesn't seem to land, the come from is a sense of certainty. And that's worth exploring for us individually, and certainly for you as a collective of women in an area of work that is probably still, I mean, I don't know the gender split, but that is probably quite male dominant. And one of the things that I like to encourage people to think about is, how do you bring that sense of certainty, but in a flavor that works for you? Because one of the things I really struggle with is when we as women become better men than the men. And sometimes it kind of feels like we have to get noticed, or to get heard, or to get respected, or whatever else. But as soon as we move away from the thing that makes us naturally who we are, it is, as Erica talked about, it's the caring, it's the giving, it's the sense of connection. The reason that there's such a strong move in so many businesses nowadays to try and get a gender balance is because those more traditionally feminine qualities we know value add to businesses, even ones where traditionally it's been one that's ridden on masculine energy. And I think this is particularly true in this modern era. I think most people are aware that masculine energy has its place in every aspect of life, but it shouldn't be dictating play in every area of life. And so it's really important that we stay true to ourselves as women and true to the kind of energy that allows us to stand in our own truth. And it is discovering, adhering to, and believing in that sense of personal truth that I think is the greatest energy to take with us if we're looking at wanting to use our voice and respect our voice and maximize our influence. As soon as you try to be someone, something, some energy that is not naturally part of you, you will lose the resonance of the message that you're sending. At the same time, and Suniti's example gives us a really good insight, sometimes we can water down our view of things because we're not really standing in our own truth. We're not really backing our own perspective on things. And I think that's probably a daily challenge, but I think it's an area that we all really want to think about and reflect on, is how do I have a sense of certainty about who I am, what I stand for, what I believe in, what I value, where my boundaries are, and what I contribute to the world. And I think the boundaries thing is particularly important, because when we get hooked into what I call the cycle of caring, where we're just caring for everyone, caring for everyone, caring for everyone, and Erica's comment is very valid for most of us. You know, if you're the go-to person for caring, then who do people go to when they need caring for? You, right? So it can actually become a bit of a vicious cycle. You give and you give and you give. And then we're putting together a working party. And I say to Patricia, oh, Patricia, we're going to need some people that, you know, there's people who are just really good at turning up and getting it done and really making sure everyone gets looked after. Oh, no worries. I'll make sure that Eric is part of the team. And it sort of becomes your badge. But we don't often stop and say, well, actually, let's just check in with Erica, because she's also giving here, giving here, giving here, giving here, giving here. Well, let's check and make sure that she feels as though she's got capacity, that there's enough water in the tank for her to be able to join the group and give. And I think that's particularly relevant for us as women. I think we really do need to stop and think about, how do I make sure I stand in my own truth in a way that is reflected in the way I operate every day? So I can set boundaries. I can say no. I can lower my sometimes ridiculously high expectations of myself so that they become much more realistic. And how do I do that in a way that it still validates the essence of me, or without me feeling as though I'm letting people down or I'm a disappointment or all of those other things, which feed into those fundamental beliefs that we sometimes hold about ourselves. Not always, but sometimes. I want to invite you all to think about a time you've absolutely nailed it. You've just nailed using your voice and using your influence in a really, really positive way, and the outcome has been mind-blowing, or as we like to say, heart-blowing, because we've all had times. Actually, sorry, before we move to that point, I just want to make one other point about the beliefs. All of us have beliefs that are enabling and that are constraining. Often, because I work with beliefs a lot, people will say, how do you define beliefs, Heather? What's your working definition of what are beliefs? And we like to say this: beliefs are thoughts we think repeatedly until we develop a sense of certainty about something. Thoughts we think repeatedly until we develop a sense of certainty about something. So if I repeatedly think, oh, I don't think they're interested in my voice in this group of people or in that working group or in this team. If I consistently think that, then every time there's a scrap of evidence to suggest that that's true, I take that as a feedback loop to say, yep, this belief is true. And I don't want to go into the neuroscience of how beliefs are formed, but if as you were growing up, your voice was the last one to be heard, e.g., I'm the only girl in a gang of boys, brothers, my voice often wasn't heard unless I was screeching. So to be honest, as a young kid, I think I was pretty loud because it was the only way to get attention, because the boys, one, there were so many of them, and two, they were always talking and they had opinions about everything, and they didn't say things so that we could explore it and have a conversation. They made what I call declarations of truth. But it invites us all to reflect on, what are the beliefs that I held as I grew up, and are they serving me? Or are there thoughts that I'm still thinking repeatedly that are feeding something about myself that I believe is negative? So no one would be interested in my opinion. That's a negative belief. And if you genuinely believe that, then the lens through which you see the world is that belief. And then when somebody does something, you automatically interpret it as evidence of the fact that that belief is true. All of us has what we call a core limiting belief, a core limiting belief. At the Elevation Company, we call it the default drama. And the reason for that is because when we're under pressure, we usually default to this belief. And when it turns up, it causes us drama. So mine is, I am responsible, for example. And that came from a number of childhood experiences where, for various reasons, I felt as though I needed to be responsible. My parents had twin girls one was stillborn and one died a couple of hours after birth. And I was only 4 at the time, and I don't consciously remember that, but I remember my mum being sad. And I remember that I was really good at looking after her and helping her to feel better. So I kind of took on, as a little 4-year-old, on my job, because if you look at the world through 4-year-old eyes in this context, my job is to make sure that my mum is happy. So I'm responsible for my mum's happiness. And then there were a series of other events over time that reinforced that belief. And so I grew up believing I am responsible. Now, in one context, as Bronwyn talked about, being responsible is a good thing. It makes me a bloody awesome consultant, because I go into businesses and I impact those businesses as if they are my own. I know how to be responsible for us getting the outcomes that we want. But in another situation, I might try and take responsibility for something that's got nothing to do. Famine in Africa, my fault for sure. No, no. And I can often burn myself out with being responsible. I was just thinking about an example of this morning. I have a lot going on at the moment, but I spent most of January working at the Incident Control Centre and the Bushfire Relief Centre here in Longwood. I live near Euroa, which is in central northeast Victoria. And the fires absolutely cleaned out pretty much our whole community. And so I took January off from my business and worked at the centre, mostly providing counselling to people who were tempted to think that life is no longer worth it, but also just assisting with provision of basic essential needs. Now, we're 3.5 months on from that, or nearly 4. And people are still calling me. Someone rang and said, look, this woman's got alpacas. She's got no feed for them. She still doesn't have a house. She's living at a local pub. She lost everything. She wasn't insured. Can you help? Sure, no problems. So I do the Erica thing. I just get on the phone and I make shit happen. Right? This morning, someone rang and said, that same person needs a drench gun and a drench pack, so that once they've put up a new fence, she can separate the nursing mothers and she can drench them for worms. Now, ladies, I don't know about you, but do I know a lot about drench? Unfortunately, actually, I do know quite a lot about drench because I grew up on a farm. But do I have a drench gun in my back pocket? No. Do I know where to go to find one? No. But for the first probably 20 minutes of the morning this morning, I was just making a bunch of phone calls to find someone who had a drench gun and a pack that this woman can use because she got no money. There's a famous saying, if you want something done and done well, give it to a really busy person. In fact, I think the famous saying is, if you want something done and done well, give it to a really busy woman. Hi. Now, did I want to say, that's probably a bit beyond me, or why don't you call the local elders, or, you know, something? Sure, I did. Did I? Nope. I just got on and did it. And herein lies one of the great gifts of being a woman, but also one of the great challenges. Because if I've got a limiting belief that says I am responsible, how do you think I go saying no when somebody asks me for a drench gun? If they'd said, look, this woman needs a drench gun, she's got plenty of money to pay, I would say, call elders. But she's been completely wiped out, and she doesn't have a dollar to her name, and she's got to rebuild her house, and she has no insurance. So my heartstrings are like, oh, okay, I need to be responsible. Yeah. It's actually really helpful for us to take a little bit of time to reflect on what are those core beliefs that we hold, particularly the limiting ones. My voice doesn't matter. I'm not important. I'm not good enough. I'm invisible. I'm responsible. Whatever it is, but just being really mindful of it, because otherwise it's an unconscious lens in your glasses. If you bring it to a conscious level, you have choice. Awareness equals insight. Insight equals choice. And freedom lives in the domain of having choices. Yeah. So if we don't know what our core limiting beliefs are, then, you know, we might make crazy decisions and think, how the hell did that happen? And look back on it and go, yep, that happened because I made myself super responsible. I literally have 2 mattresses in my hallway in my house, just being stored there while we wait for some people to build houses so that when they're ready, the beds are there to go. Like literally, this is the extent to which I'll take responsibility for my community. It's crazy. I'm sure there are not other people. Admittedly, I now live alone, so that helps. But I'm sure there's no one else in town that's got 2 mattresses sitting in a hallway, just waiting, being protected, waiting for somebody to take them. Yeah. It doesn't matter that I choose that as long as I'm making a conscious choice as opposed to feeling responsible. Every now and again, like I was cleaning the house yesterday and I thought, oh, these mattresses are annoying. Most of the time I turn the corner into the passageway and look and see the mattresses and go, oh, bless that I'm protecting these mattresses so that when somebody really needs it, the beds are there. But that's the difference, is that if you're aware of the driving energy behind the choice and it's a positive one, no problems. But if you're making these choices unconsciously, being driven by a limiting belief, a default drama, then that's not so helpful. Enough about the beliefs. Let's move on to something a little bit more, well, a little bit less icky. Let's say that. I want you to think about a time that you've really used your voice well. We often say there is wisdom in exceptions. There is wisdom in exceptions. And what I mean by that is when things get difficult, we can sometimes get overwhelmed by the challenges or the difficulties or whatever. And we tend to, the challenges make us go looking at all the things that led to the problem, as opposed to, all right, think about a time that I've done this really well. What was different? And I genuinely want you to do that. I genuinely want you to take some time to think about one time, many times, I don't care, but at least one time that you've used your voice or your influence to a really positive outcome. And if you can only think of one, that's okay. So how have you used your voice or your influence in a very positive way? And I want you to ask, what was different? What was different? So, for example, I have a very high value, well, it's my 5th highest value, on justice. And so part of the reason I got so involved after the immediate response to the fires, part of the reason I got so involved was because so many people were coming and telling stories of injustice about, I can't get benefits for this reason. You know, one man wasn't entitled to an evacuation levy, which was a benefit of about $1,000 because he was already on a CFA truck. And I was just like, that is insane and incredibly unjust. So in I go, right? So what caused the choices that I made in that situation? It was a cause greater than myself, but it triggered a really important value for me, which is justice. So I just want to give you a moment, again, with some thinking music, to think about a time where you've done it and done it really well, and what was different that enabled you to find your voice, use your voice, and use your influence to create a particular outcome. And your time begins now.
Connected to Heather's iPhone to.
Sorry. You can tell somebody else usually does the music for me. When did I use my voice or influence really well, and what was different? One more minute. Okay. And again, without dobbing in Erica, I'd love to hear some of your answers. Who'd like to share a time that they've used their voice well, or they've used their influence well, and what was different?
Look, I will go again then.
Good on you.
When I was in uni, I was in the reserves, like the Army Reserves, and like we had one task that I suppose we were given. I was in the engineers corps, and we were given like just higher responsibilities for the day, and like that was one thing that I did do really well. We had to get a segmental sort of bridge set up and a crossing, and I just handled it really well. I was able to just manage everyone, and we got it done in like our time frame and everything like that. And so so that was one thing that I thought that I had done really well, and and had the outcome as well of just being completed and satisfactory to the time limits
Right.
and everything. So
good on you, Erica. May I ask you a couple of questions about that?
Sure.
What do you think helped you in that situation to use your voice, your influence, your leadership well?
Well, I was going through uni at the time as well, so I think, and doing engineering, so I think having just that background knowledge of how things work and why things work, and like I was able to explain how the bridge needs to go together for people. Like it's all different segments that you have to pin together and everything. So I think that helped, and just the people around me. My husband was actually there as well, and we worked together and were able to do it quite well. So it was just team effort, and everyone sort of listened and engaged when we needed to. So
Great. Two other questions. One's a quick one. Was your husband your husband at that point in time?
He was my boyfriend at that time,
Okay.
but now he's my husband.
Because sometimes just having that one person who believes in us.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes just having that one person who believes in us. They don't even necessarily need to be there with you. It could be a favorite teacher, it could be a grandparent, it could, whatever. But sometimes having that one person that believes in us is enough to cement our belief in ourselves. Second question, Erica, was if I asked people that were in your team that day what you did that made it successful, what do you think they'd say?
Well, I always engage with people and make sure to keep checking in, make sure that everyone's still heading in the right direction. Like that's pretty much
Beautiful.
Just that connection and touching base sort of thing.
Yeah. And this beautifully illustrates exactly the point. So part of the reason I ask a question like, if I ask someone in your team, what would they say, is because, again, we're thinking about ourselves as if we're thinking about ourselves. We're not thinking about ourselves in the way of how others think about us. So based on what you just said, Erica, you could have added to your list of qualities leadership, communication, team engagement, mission clarity. So there's all of these things that you were doing and being that made that successful. And this is an appropriate point, I think, to talk about. We at the Elevation Company have a saying: the learning lives in the debrief. The learning lives in the debrief. And unfortunately, often, so very often, we don't debrief. We get something done and we rush off to the next thing. And we don't take the time to go, okay, pause. What did we do? What did we learn? How can we apply that next time? Or what did we do? What did we learn? And how can we expand on that or extend on that next time? Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Erica, for volunteering yourself. Who else would like to share? What a quiet bunch you are. Are you like this when we put you in a room? Yeah, maybe a little bit. Come on, folks. Someone's got something to say. I'm absolutely certain of it. Otherwise, we can play my favorite game, which is called Dob in a Caller. And I'm probably going to pick on someone who doesn't have their camera turned on because that's my second favorite game. Okay, Sharon Twist. Are you there, Sharon? Oh, great glasses.
I'm here. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And I actually, you know, cleaned them this morning as well. So hopefully my lens is nice and clean.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily change the filter on the way we see life, unfortunately, Sharon, but it is at least good to have a clear view. So what did you come up with? Can you share with us, as Erica did?
Well, I guess I've got a little bit of a different role to our lovely cohort here. So I work in PP&C in culture and leadership, and I'm just sort of, you know, here just observing and, you know, loving the session so far, Heather. So thank you. I guess, you know, it's a bit of an interesting one in my role because I need to try and influence leaders a lot of the time, you know, in terms of, you know, how we adopt the, you know, approach or, you know, different situations. And I think that, I guess what I try to do is really just articulate my thoughts, like, you know, visualize, you know, my thinking to leaders to kind of take them on the journey around, you know, my judgment, I guess, my judgments, what I'm considering, these are the reasons. So it's a little bit of a storytelling exercise, I would say. Yeah. But, you know, again, you know, I think for me as well, I'm always reflecting and thinking about, you know, who am I about to have the conversation with? How am I going to sort of, you know, navigate this conversation? So I also take the time to prep and reflect a lot.
Yeah. That's a hard thing to hear from a person in people and culture, because I think that the capacity to reflect is crucial, and we can't teach it if we don't model it. So yeah, good on you, Sharon. I'm glad I chose you. I think there's a couple of really valuable comments in what Sharon has just shared. One is the power of story. Ooh, don't we all just love a good story? You know, you think about how you felt when you're a small child and someone read a book to you or with you or something like that. I was actually just talking about this with some colleagues that are helping me redo the education system this morning, and we were talking about that emotional connection that you have when someone reads to you. And I actually dared to say, if you want to get me into bed, just tell me you're going to read to me when we get there. It's literally that simple because I just love it. I've got such a strong association with it. So the power of story is a really important one for us to think about. How can we tell a story? How can we help people arrive at their own conclusions? Because what I know for sure is if you are the person with all the answers, it's a little bit like the parent, Erica being one of the people with all the caring. If you're the person with all the answers, you train people to keep coming to your door for more answers. We have a strategy that we share with large organizations with whom we work. We call it the 3x3 strategy. And basically, if someone comes to me with an undefined problem, I say to them, that doesn't seem very clear. Why don't you go away and get clear about what the problem is? So the 3x3 strategy is, firstly, come to me with a clearly defined problem. Einstein said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I spend 50 minutes defining it. In other words, once you're clear about what the problem is, it's simple enough to come up with a solution. If the problem is unclear, we'll just go round and round the mulberry bush. First, come to me with a clearly defined problem. Second, come to me with 3 recommendations of possible solutions. And third, tell me which one I should choose and why. Now, even if I come up with a completely different solution, what you've just done is demonstrate first and foremost to you that you can define the problem, come up with 3 solutions, and suggest which one should be chosen and why. You've also demonstrated to me that you can do that. And sometimes I will agree with you, even if I don't necessarily think your suggestion is the best one, simply because it helps you grow in belief about yourself and your own capacity to solve your own problems. So you don't have to keep coming to me. For those of you who are in leadership positions, this 3x3 strategy is gold. Because again, hands up, if you've got a whole lot of time where you're sitting around in your office thinking, gee, I wish somebody would bring me a problem. No, said no one ever, right? So you want to train the people in your team to come to you only when they've got a clearly defined problem, when they know what 3 possible solutions are, and they can tell you which one they think you should choose and why. And even if you come up with something completely different, you can take a moment to go, I really love what you've done there. I love the reflecting that you've done there. Good on you, Sharon. They're really good suggestions. Just for this reason, I'm wondering whether we should expand our thinking a little bit to think about blah, which might be something that Sharon hasn't thought about. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So do you think that could be a potential? Yeah, actually, that'd be great. Great, knock yourself out. It is much better for me as a leader that my leadership encourages you to be a better leader. Great leaders don't stand out the front taking all the acclaim. Great leaders grow other leaders. A mate of mine often says, you can't call yourself a leader if the people around you are not growing. And I really like what you've suggested, Sharon, for that reason. The second thing that you talked about was the importance of preparation. Preparation because you want to be clear about what you're delivering and the way you're delivering it, the energy of the message. What you're delivering and the energy in the message. Because what Sunita shared before highlighted the fact that sometimes if the energy is uncertain or a little bit soft or a bit apologetic almost, it won't land in a way that represents the truth of what you're offering. And the third thing is the process of reflection. And this one's a little bit of a two-edged sword. Reflection is really good, but not if you're using it as a weapon of self-destruction. If you're reflecting only so that you can get out the cat o' nine tails and like give yourself a good whipping for how badly you did, that's not reflection, that's self-abrasion. There's a difference. So we're making sure that we can look at these exception stories and say, yeah, what mattered there? What mattered in this situation is that Sharon's recognizing that she doesn't want to be the go-to person for all things P&C or HR. She wants to take the leaders on a journey so they are empowered to respond to their own issues. So a really clear picture of the outcome that you're wanting to achieve. What is your North Star? What is your defining path? Makes it much easier to decide what steps you're going to take to head there. Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. I'm glad I dobbed you in. Does anyone else?
There was probably one more reflection I had, Heather, just in that space was, you know, in that coaching realm, when you're going into a conversation and there's things bubbling away that you're like, oh, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that. How do you kind of reflect on that and turn your concerns into questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah. One thing that is important is when we're having these conversations is to be really clear that we're talking about what we're talking about. I know that sounds silly, but if I want to come to you and say I'm really concerned about the fact that we only have blue pens, then often what happens is we get detoured, and unfortunately us women are great exponents of this. We get detoured because I come and I say, hey, Patricia, I'd like to have a conversation with you about the fact that we only have blue pens. And Patricia says, oh, don't get me started. The pens are the least of my problems. We've also got limited access to cars and we don't have enough tech and, you know, we don't have enough funding for all of that. And somewhere along the line, the fact that you wanted to talk about the pen gets lost. And you don't want to go away going, oh, I didn't actually even get to talk about the pen, right? Or you don't want to go away going, oh, Patricia never listens. You want to be sure that you're really clear about what it is you want to talk about. So if you went in to talk about the pen, then you would simply say, Patricia, thank you for sharing your frustration with all of those other things that are a challenge as well. Can I just bring us back to the pen? Today, I just want us to talk about the pen. Let's put those other things that you mentioned onto the frustration board. Let's actually let's honor what you've said by writing those things down, because we might need to come up with some strategies to solve those problems as well. Today, I just want to talk about the pen. Now, your ability to do that depends on your clarity about what the pen actually is. And so this sort of preparation for the conversation is a really important one. Sharon, I think what you're asking is, when I'm in a situation, we're having a discussion and somebody raises a whole bunch of things, and I've just got that gut feeling. By the way, ladies, trust the gut. Intuition has kept your children alive. That's good enough for me. If my intuition says there's we're standing in a bakery and I can smell fish, then I'm going to name it, right? If your intuition is knocking on your door, please listen to it. So I think you're talking, Sharon, about a situation where you're in a conversation and there's things named that seem to be impacting but are not being identified. Is that the kind of context you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking more in like the open collaboration. There's things coming up and you're like, I've got concerns about this. But sometimes when you go straight in, if you kind of, go straight to the point, then it can kind of like take people offside a little bit. So, if you ask more questions, to get a better clarity of that, for them to articulate their thoughts into the room, then it can be easier then to get a more broader perspective of, that's sort of where I was headed. Yeah.
So let me give you 3 really simple strategies, and not just talking to Sharon, obviously. The first thing that I do is almost always, I'm a great pen and paper person because I'm not young and fabulous like you guys. I'm carrying around a book. In the back of the book, one of the things I'll almost always have is a picture of an elephant. And at some point during the conversation, I'll pull it out and I'll say, can I just pause? Are there any elephants influencing this conversation that are not being named? Let's just pause and let's all step back. And sometimes I'll even get them standing up out of their chairs, standing behind their chairs, just before we go on. I'm just going to put the elephant here on the table, and I will write down any elephants that might be influencing this conversation that we haven't yet named. We don't necessarily have to deal with them today, but let's make them obvious so they don't come and sit on us and get in the way of our communication. So one simple strategy, it's a good idea to introduce that before you introduce that. Don't go to a meeting and go, I'm going to pull out an elephant, because people will be like, what the hell? Sharon's been off to some weird training, Introduce it as a strategy first. I love what I call the empty chair strategy. So we're in a meeting and there's 8 of us. I make sure that there's a spare chair every time. And before we begin, especially if I'm expecting that the conversation might have some challenging elements to it, and Sharon, obviously, you go in with a clear intended outcome. So the outcome is that we work together to come up with a solution to this problem here. And in your heart of hearts that there's going to be some people who are not speaking their truth, or there's going to be, blah, 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 blah. You designate the chair as you need it to be. So it might be the client chair. So before we get into, we're going to do this, this, and this, let's designate the chair as the client chair. Would somebody like to go and sit in that chair and be the client and tell me what you think about this conversation? Or it could be the unspoken influence chair. I'm just going to go and sit myself in the unspoken influence. I'm just going to be interested in a few things that I feel like are happening here. I often will call it the curiosity chair, which means that they don't like me. You're very welcome, Rish. Which means that they don't like me instead of not liking me, they don't like their displeasure is at the chair instead of at me. So I'm just going to sit in the curiosity chair, and I'm just going to be curious about a few things here. We've talked about this 3 times, but we haven't got a resolution. I'm curious about that. We've talked about this, but there seems to be a bit of a divide between the team members about how we think we're going to approach it. And I'm just curious about that. So it's almost as if you're articulating the things that intuitively you know are at play in the group, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't offend anyone, Sharon, because you're sitting in the curiosity chair. And then what I'll do is I'll drop 2 or 3 bombs, issues. And then I'll get up and get out of the chair and say, does anyone else want to have a turn in the chair? And it kind of gives permission for things that are influencing but not being called out to be named. The other thing is that I often will go into a room, especially with consulting clients, and somewhere on the whiteboard, I'll designate a portion of the board to be the unresolved issues list, like a parking space. And then if somebody wants to start a cat fight about something, I say, that's a really great unresolved issue. Shall I put it on the parking space so that we can talk about it next time? Yeah, or shall I put it on the parking space and let's make a separate time to actually unpack that, and then we'll come back to this group with specific recommendations. They would be my 3 go-to suggestions, Sharon. But I reserve the right to have what I call a good frog march. And what I mean by that, normally I don't frog march people out of the office, but I follow people who I believe have an agenda that is not aligned with what the group is trying to do. And I'll just follow them back to their room and they'll say, hey, Fred, can I just have a conversation with you? I have a whole bunch of curiosities, but out of respect to you, I didn't want to raise them in there. The only other thing that I would talk about, Sharon, and particularly if it's a one-to-one or you've got a group that's got sort of the us and them, is we call this the 6-9 phenomenon. So if I get a giant 6 and put it in the middle of the room, the people who are this side looking that way will say it's a 6. The people that side looking this way will say it's a 9. And many is the argument that's gone down because I'm 6ing and you're 9ing and we're arguing with each other. And instead I go, pause. I'm really interested in why you think it's a 9. I'm going to come around to your perspective and look from your angle so that I get, because the best outcome is that you name the problem, but you work together to come up with the solution. Instead of, you're the problem, Sharon. No, Heather, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. You stupid P and C people, you know, you blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, well, what about you stupid engineers and you blah, blah, blah. I mean, you'd never speak to each other like that, but I'm, dramatizing to make the point, right? The ideal outcome is when you externalize the problem from the person and name the problem as the problem, and you be aligned in resolving the problem. It's kind of parenting 101. Johnny is not the problem. Johnny leaving his school bag in the middle of the laundry when he comes home from school is not the problem. The problem is the laundry is cluttered because of the school bag. And the other problem is you've told Johnny 50 times. But if you and Johnny are not working together to solve the problem, then you just see Johnny as the problem and Johnny sees you as the problem. Make sense? Yeah. A good frog march never goes astray, especially if you're in the P&C role, Sharon. Permission to frog march. You can still frog march people and have a curious conversation. I honestly think one of the most powerful things any of us can do when we're in, not so much in conflict, but when we can't get a resolution to something or we're in conflict, is to stay in what we call a stance of curiosity. Because even if someone says, Heather, I think you're a complete idiot. Instead of reacting to that, I'd be like, wow, can I buy you coffee? Because I'd really love to chat and see me from your perspective. I'd really like to try and understand what's going on there. Because I know in my head and in my heart, it's probably their limiting belief, their default drama, or the fact that I remind them of the mother they don't like or the mother-in-law they don't like. You know, it's generally not me. So if I don't take it personally, but I come from a place of curiosity, then you can, the energy of that is expansive and opening. Yeah. The energy of judgment is to close down.
Yeah. And it's to get to beyond the surface of actually all of these little, you know, the observations or the, all the little fires that are going off. What's actually going on beyond the surface? It's actually going on. Yes. To resolve.
We have a strategy, Sharon, that might be helpful. We say we often spend a lot of time talking about the speaker. So here's the problem, and this is the problem, and that's the problem. When in fact the source of the music is the phone. Right? The source of the music is the phone. So are we talking about the speaker or are we talking about the phone?
Yeah.
And even using that metaphor, one of my consulting clients, the director the other day, he said, I feel like this is a speaker conversation. Have we actually nailed the phone? I went, oh, that's a really good challenge. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. No, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sharon. And obviously we're not just talking about PNC, because all of you are in the business of influencing, leading, supporting, being a part of group activities and innovations and those sorts of things within the business. If you feel as though there's a bad smell in your bakery, the way in which you call that out is important too, because I know this for sure, people. When you walk away and say nothing, you'll start judging yourself. When you walk away, knowing that there's something going on in there that's not being named, when you walk away and say nothing, you'll start giving yourself a hard time. Come on, Heather, you're better than that. You know that there's a problem in there and no one's talking about it. And, someone's going to have to, because otherwise it's just going to get in the way of the outcome. Yeah, you'll give yourself a hard time about it anyway. Okay, one more thing that I want to talk with you about. There are key voices inside our heads, and not something you need to deal with today, but something I'd love you to take away with you. There are key voices inside our head, and not all of those voices are our own. We sort of rent space in our head to people who have had an influence on us. And what I'd encourage you to do is to go away and think about who are the 10 key voices that influence the kind of leader you are. Who are the 10 key voices, or who owns the 10 key voices that influence the kind of leader that you are? So, for example, one of my first bosses way back was just a brilliant man. His name was Brian, and he was so very good at inspiring people and engaging people and bringing people together toward a particular outcome. He's one of the key voices in my head when I think about the kind of leader I want to be. My mum and my grandmother are two key voices, incredibly strong women, but very caring and very loving and very nurturing and very much coming from a heart space. So the heart that I bring to how I do the things that I do in the world is very much influenced by their voices. So I invite you to spend a little bit of time at some stage just thinking about, if I really reflect on the 10 key voices that go off in my mind about who I am as a leader, who would they be? Some of them will be a 10 key voice, one of the 10 key voices in a positive way. And some of them will be a key voice in a negative way. So that person was an absolute pig of a man, and I didn't like the way he did business, and he used to humiliate people publicly, and He never gave context, so people couldn't make informed decisions. So I, as a result, want to be this kind of leader, where I'm open, I'm communicative, and I engage people and I involve people, and, you know, I don't dictate terms. I empower my people to make decisions for themselves. Yeah. But it's a useful exercise because, again, when we've got awareness, we've got insight. When we've got insight, we can make different choices rather than have those voices just playing on repeat inside us in a way that may not necessarily be helpful or even enjoyable, for that matter. I think that the other thing that I want to talk about, and sort of all of this, you might say, is coming together around this next concept, is this concept of metacognition. And I kind of like to put my hand up here, and we sometimes refer to as the cold shower of awareness. Metacognition is basically the ability in real time to be aware of what's happening for you. What's going on in me in real time. So I mean, obviously you can't teach this stuff if you're not living it. And so I put a fair bit of time and energy and focus every day into multiple practices that help me stay really alert to what's happening inside me. And when something's a bit off, I know exactly what the feeling is going to be. It'll be a tightness in my sort of solar plexus. It'll be a shallowing of my breathing. It will be, if I miss those two, those tend to be the first two, but if I miss those, it will be something in the speed of how I talk and how, you know, when I get wound up, I sort of speak as if, you know, everyone thinks it's like trying to get a, you know, mouthful of water from a fire hydrant. What are the things that indicate for you that you're out of sorts, that something is misaligned within you, something has been triggered? Because if you can actually have an awareness of that in real time, several things happen. Number one, you are less reactive. Number two, you get to explore the context within which the triggers come up. And number three, you get to reflect on triggers as treasures. And what I mean by that is, particularly for us as women, when we get triggered, I like to think it is the universe's way of saying, hey, there's something here for you to learn. There's an element of your brilliance that is not being expressed. So I'm going to give you this situation, which is really just a universal mirror. I'm going to give you this situation so you get triggered, and I want you to take a moment to go in and go, what's this about? What does the universe want me to learn? If you find that there are repeating patterns in your life, everyone takes you for granted, or why do I always end up with the grumpy bosses? Or how come I always end up in teams of men that never really listen? I would say if there's a pattern to those things, it is because the universe wants you to learn something about yourself that up until now you either haven't learned or you haven't fully integrated the learning about. Triggers are treasures. Instead of moving away from the things that trigger you, turn toward it and go, what can I learn here? If the universe wanted me to learn something about my own capacities, my own brilliance, about every part of my potential inside me that's not being tapped into or not being fully expressed right now, what would it want me to learn? And the great gift of metacognition is if you catch it early, you can learn right there in the moment. At the Elevation Company, we like to say this: if you listen to the universe when it hits you with a feather, it doesn't have to hit you with a truck. Right? If you listen to the universe when it hits you with a feather, it doesn't have to hit you with a brick. If you listen to the universe when it hits you with a brick, it doesn't have to hit you with a truck. If you listen to the universe when it hits you with a truck, it doesn't have to hit you with a 737. That's a big airplane, by the way. right? So it's best that we listen, that we notice things as soon as they change. And the quickest way for us to do that is our physiological triggers. What are the things that happen in your body when something is out of sorts? If you can develop the capacity to sit above yourself and reflect on that in real time, that is what metacognition is all about. And fundamentally, it will help you to avoid being reactive, which is then something about which you can self-abrase later. If you're not reactive, if you respond well, if you catch yourself and go, actually, you're just going to have to give me a moment with that, folks. Just let me reflect for a minute. In fact, I'll just go to the toilet and I'll think about it and I'll come back to you. Right? Because it's always better for us to come from a responding place than it is to come from a reacting place. Equally, as soon as something changes in us, if we notice it, we can shift it. And then the energetic flow is much more natural. As soon as you get stuck, as soon as something is triggered in you and you don't look at it, that stuckness stops the flow of your energy. So you get tired, you doubt yourself, you question yourself, you put yourself through all sorts of hoops that you don't actually need to jump through. So, in conclusion, Patricia did ask if I would make sure that I kept a little bit of space for people to ask questions, so I will be true to that. Let me just talk specific strategies for you for a moment. Number one, align your decisions to your highest values. Well, number one, know what your values are, and then line your decisions to them. Number two, check in with people on the outside of your bottle. You might be thinking you're a hopeless piece of work. They might be thinking you're a god. Check in with people on the outside of your bottle. Number three, use the 3x3 structure to empower the people you lead or influence. So come to me with a clearly defined problem, 3 recommendations, and then tell me which one I should choose and why. Strategy number 4, the learning lives in the debrief. So make sure you debrief, not to make a list of everything you did wrong, but to actually make a list of how well you did and what learning you can take from it to apply in other situations. Number 5, self-observation, metacognition, keeping watch on yourself and loving on challenges or triggers instead of resisting them. That which we resist will persist. So it's better just to turn toward them and love on them. Number 6, it's actually quite a useful thing to do, even if you only did it on a Friday afternoon before you leave the office for the last time, or whatever is your last day of the week, is to just start a reflection journal and capture what I call your golden nuggets. What did I do really well this week? Who did I be that was really positive this week? So it could be character traits or thoughts that you think, or a level of energy that you bring, much more than specific actions or outcomes. Number 7, this will be a stretch for you. Write a letter to yourself about how amazing you are. Dear Gemma, I just want to write and tell you, I really admire how you've shown up this week, but blah, 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 blah. And then put it in an envelope, put your address on it, stick a stamp on it, and give it to a friend and say, when the universe moves you, send this to me, please. And it's really weird to see how often those letters just arrive at the perfect time. The Power of You event that Patricia was talking about, which we run at the Yarra Valley Estate, as it happens, out in your domain. We get everyone to write themselves a letter, and then they send it to me. They write it and give it to me. And then when the universe says, send it now, I put a stamp on it and stick it in the mail. And 99% of the time, people say, oh my God, that could not have arrived at a better time. Thank you, Kate. Number 8, find your tribe. I think you might have it here. But find the people who get you, find the people who understand you, find the people who believe in you, because there will be days that you wobble. And the next one is fill your own tank. Do not rely on other people to fill your tank. They will use the wrong flavor of water, or they'll put lemon in it when you wanted ginger, or, you know, fill your own tank. And in a sense, Patricia, I think we've got some feedback there, Del. And in a sense, if you fill your own tank, then you know that you'll fill it with what you want and need, not what somebody else thinks you should have. Enough from me. Questions, comments, queries, concerns, anything else beginning with K? No, I'm only kidding. Any questions that you want to ask, or feedback that you want to provide, or curiosities that you have? Thanks, Cynthia. You've all gone terribly quiet. I know how the corporate world works. You've probably all got 2 o'clock appointments. So you're wanting to be quiet and respectful and all the rest of it, but you're also wanting to run and pee and get into your next meeting. Ladies, thank you so much for allowing me to share this time with you. I hope it's been helpful. Patricia, thank you from my heart to yours for the invitation to come and join. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. If I can be of any further assistance, you know where I am.
Yes, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Heather, I will circulate your contacts so people can continue the conversation as they wish. Really appreciate everybody that spent, 2 hours with us today, and all those that will watch this after, and all the insights, Heather, that you provided a lot of food for thought for all of us. So thank you for coming.
You're very welcome.
You all around.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.